ask a question, just type it in the chat box that you've been using uh, to talk about the audio problems we've been having. And then we'll get to the questions at the end of the presentation. The webinar is being recorded. The recording and the PowerPoint presentation will be emailed after the webinar. They'll also be posted on our website. There'll also be a brief survey following the webinar. Please complete it. About the HSJCC briefly, the Human Services and Justice Coordinating Committee network is comprised of 39 local committees, 14 regional committees, and 1 provincial committee. There are voluntary collaboration between health and social service organizations, community mental health and addiction organizations, and various partners from the justice sector, including Crown attorneys, judges, police services, and correctional service providers. And without further ado, our webinar today is Understanding FASD in the Law, Order, and Justice Setting. And I'll turn it over to our presenter today.
Hi everyone, my name is Mira. I am the PLFASD worker, and I am bringing to you today a training series called Now What? And the reason why we named this Now What is because no matter where I go, whatever community agency I'm talking to, whatever audience I'm training, everyone is thinking FASD, but now what? What does it mean? What do I do? How do I deal with the behaviors? Where do we go from here? So hopefully you'll get some answers through the course of this little training series that you're going to get. I start every single one of my trainings off with a quote from R.J. Formanak. And for those of you who don't know R.J., he is an adult who lives with FASD. He got diagnosed at the age of 41, and he sought his diagnosis because he didn't understand why he couldn't hold down a full-time job. Why couldn't he sustain a long-term romantic relationship? Why at the age of 12 did he have over 21 foster care placements? And what he said was my own brain conspired against me. And the reason I include this is that because we have so many individuals that live with FASD in our society, we have an obligation to understand what that brain is and to understand why that brain is going up against stigmas and barriers and judgment, but also it's going up against its own self every single day. And navigating through a fabric of society that doesn't understand it isn't going to help this population at all. So there's 3 objectives to this study, to this training. It's 1, hopefully to understand the impact of prenatal alcohol exposure. 2, to reduce the stigma and increase the awareness around FASD. And 3, to understand the behaviors seen as a result of having FASD. And because of understanding those behaviors, hopefully you're going to walk away and understand some of those interactions you're seeing with the law and justice system in Canada. So first I want to start off with the definition. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder is not a mental health diagnosis, and this is a huge shift in the field. About 20 years ago when it was introduced, people did think, okay, maybe it is mental health. Maybe we can treat it with, drugs. Maybe we can look for interventions and therapies that may work. But now, in present day, we know that it's not mental health. It is a brain-based invisible disability. And through the course of this crash course training session, I hope that you'll get an understanding as to why it's brain-based and why this is an invisible disability, and it's more prevalent than we actually think. So here's how I want you to start thinking about FASD. It is a permanent brain injury. It is no different than a TBI to the brain. When you're playing hockey and you get hit in the head with a hockey puck, you sustain permanent injury. This means sometimes you're not going to be able to swallow properly. You're going to be talking out of turn. You'll have a lot of impulse control issues. And we make accommodations for that acquired brain injury because we saw the injury happen and we know that there's a permanent lasting brain injury. The thing with FASD is that it's no different. It's a permanent brain injury. There's long-lasting effects. It could affect your cognitive functioning, your ability to make sound decisions, your impulse control. And the only difference is that the trauma in this case was alcohol, and it occurred in the womb of the mom, so you weren't there to witness it. So I'm going to take you through the fetal developmental chart. So this is a normal developing fetus. If you introduce alcohol at any stage during pregnancy, so this is trimester 1, 2, or 3, you're going to affect the network of neurons that you have. Overall, the size of your brain is going to be reduced in size. Your lobes are also going to be reduced. The quantity of neurons that you have firing, so your information processing highways in your brain, are also reduced. So overall, we're dealing with a smaller brain and smaller capacity. If we zero in on weeks 6 to 7, so if we expose the fetus to alcohol during weeks 6 to 7, that is when the corpus callosum is the most vulnerable to the effects of alcohol. So what is the corpus callosum? So taking a step back, in this image you'll see on the left side there's an MRI of an individual who has not been exposed to alcohol prenatally. That red arrow is pointing to that white cap. That white cap is a bundle of nerves called the corpus callosum. On the right side is an MRI image of an individual who has been exposed to alcohol prenatally, and that red arrow is essentially pointing to nothing. Now, admittedly, this is a very extreme case of an MRI image showing a non-exposed brain to an exposed brain. And that's not to say that every single individual that has been exposed to alcohol prenatally looks like this individual on the right. But the whole point is to drive home that if you are exposed to alcohol during weeks 6 to 7, you are going to cause considerable damage to that corpus callosum. Now, outside of that little period of weeks 6 to 7, if you're exposed to alcohol, you will cause damage to that corpus callosum. The extent of damage is something we don't know yet. Now, why do we care about this corpus callosum? Well, taking another step back, we know that our two sides of our brain are responsible for two different things. Our left side is responsible for our logic, our analytical reasoning, our ability to make sound decisions. Our right side is responsible for our creativity, our emotions, our ability to connect with each other. So when you want to have a behavioral output, you need your emotions to talk to your logic, and then we behave as such. Now, the thing that ties these two concepts together, the left and the right side, is the bridge called the corpus callosum. So now if you have damage to that bridge and you see someone with FASD acting out or they're having some kind of outburst and you're thinking that's really illogical, it's because there was no logic employed in that position or that place. They really only access their right side of their brain and they access their emotional being. They didn't put any logic into that. They didn't put any analytical thought. They didn't think about the consequences of their actions or how it would affect anyone around them. Now, if we zero in on weeks 3 to 8, if you expose the fetus to alcohol at any stage during pregnancy, you are going to see some damage to that brain. However, during weeks 3 to 8 is when the most damage can occur for cognitive deficits in a developing fetus. Now, why is that important? It's important because 61% of pregnancies in Canada are unplanned. And when you think about when a woman finds out she's pregnant for the first time, it's typically not weeks 3 or 4. The stat actually says Canadian women find out that they're pregnant around weeks 7 and 8. So if we're looking at a time frame of cognitive deficits to be the ultimate high between weeks 3 to 8, and we don't find out we're pregnant until later on, and we're part of that 61% of pregnancies in Canadian women that are unplanned, we're having a whole slew of women who are socially drinking and engaging in social acts that involve alcohol consumption, and we may inadvertently expose the fetus to alcohol without knowing. Now, there was a study that was conducted, and we will look at that study in a little bit, but when they asked women, did you drink during their pregnancy, 100% of the women polled said no. So then they asked the question in a different way. When did you have your last drink versus when did you find out you were pregnant? And it found out that 95% of women stopped drinking the moment they found out they were pregnant. However, there was a subset of women that didn't know they were pregnant, so they were drinking while they were still pregnant. And once they found out, they stopped. Now, that's trying to tell you that our prevalence of this population is a lot higher than what we think. Now, when I first started this role, clinicians at Aranote Kids would ask me all the time, this doesn't happen here. It does not happen in Canada. It has to happen somewhere else. And the reason why I include this is to kind of debunk that myth. Worldwide, 55% of women will abstain from alcohol, but in North America, only 29%. So that means we're dealing with a population of 70% of women who are engaging in social drinking. So this is not looking at moms who are addicted. This is not looking at younger moms. We are looking at, actually the stat shows that women are married, higher social economical income, higher education, and that is the demographic of women who are engaging in social drinking, and that is the demographic of women who generally have children that have had prenatal alcohol exposure leading to FASD. So let's take a look at the prevalence. FASD is recognized as one of the most leading known causes of developmental disabilities in the Western world. It is 2.5 times more common than autism. So let that sink in for a second. 2.5 times more common than autism, yet everybody knows autism. Everyone knows autistic strategies. You go to teachers college, you are trained in autistic strategies. But we have more of these FASD kiddos in our population, and nobody knows what it is. FASD is 19 times more common than cerebral palsy, 28 times more common than Downs, and 40 times more common than Tourette syndrome. So in Canada, although FASD is the most prevalent developmental disability, it is the least understood, the least supported, and the most grossly underfunded developmental disability that we have. So I mentioned that studies that we found 95% of women, once they found out they were pregnant, stopped drinking. So part of that study was also looking at the prevalence rate of school-age children that have FASD. So the World Health Organization conducted a study. CAMH in Toronto was a part of it. They polled kids in the GTA. So Peel was a part of this region, and I mentioned Peel because that's where I'm from. And what they found was the prevalence rate of FASD amongst school-age children was 2 to 3%. Now that's a huge number because already it's 2 to 3 times higher than what they originally thought. When I talked to the researcher who actually conducted the study, she actually said the data is showing it's more likely 5 to 7% of school-age children have FASD. So what does that mean for the region of Peel? In Peel, we have 1.3 million people. So that means we have 7,013 kids as a conservative estimate that have FASD. A conservative estimate. That is not actually the reality. We have a lot more of these kids than we think about. Now let's take another quick step back. Another myth that I'd like to debunk is that a lot of people think that this happens to someone who has had a lot of consumption of alcohol during their pregnancy. So the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism defines having a binge drinking event as a woman consuming 4 or more standard drinks in one sitting. So let's take a look at this wine glass. The wine glass for a standard drink is considered 5 ounces. When you go to the restaurant, you're not offered 5 ounces. You're offered 6 ounces, 9 ounces, or the bottle. So already that 4 or more standard drinks goes down to 3 or 2. So if you're offered or you're sitting there on a Friday night with your girlfriend or your partner and you have consumed 2 or 3 glasses of wine, you have participated in a binge drinking event. Now, research isn't able to tell us as of this moment how much and at what stage of pregnancy you can consume or how much you can consume before there is an effect. So the take-home message from every single researcher from across the board for FASD is there is no safe amount of alcohol that can be consumed during a pregnancy. So really the take-home from all of this is to really understand FASD really can affect anybody. Now we're going to go into some of the brain damage that you're going to see. So because of prenatal alcohol exposure, you're going to see some structural changes in the brain. And because of these structural changes, they're going to lead to cognitive deficits and also behavioral challenges. Now, also on the other end, because of prenatal alcohol exposure, you're going to see some physical facial feature abnormalities. So I'm going to walk you through each one of these. So here's the brain. And if you look at the very bottom of this picture, you'll see that little stem. That's the brain stem. So the brain grows up and out like a cauliflower from that brain stem. And as it's growing, you have these glial cells that grow with it. So the glial cells has 2 functions in the brain. One, it provides the structural integrity of this brain to keep it up. So it's like when you build a house, you don't just put up the drywall because your house will crumble. You need to have beams and structural supports and the wood put in first. So that's what your glial cell structure is doing, is providing the structural integrity. The other function of the glial cell structure is to provide a roadmap for our neurons. So those are our brain cells. And we need our neurons because that's how information flows throughout our brain. Now, what happens when our neurons are now starting to grow up from the origin as well is that they use it as a roadmap to get to where they need to go. So if we're going to go to the front part where our forehead is, we need a whole bunch of neurons that are specialized for the forefront of our brain to find their way there so that they can function. Now, here's what happens when we introduce alcohol into the mix. Our glial cell structure now has holes in it, which means our neurons are not only reduced in size, but they also don't have their roadmap anymore, which means they don't find the right spot in their brain, and if they're not in the right spot, they won't actually function properly. So taking a look at what that means, when you're starting at the base of your neck, at the very back, so that's where that brain stem starts, and you're starting to grow up and out, when your neurons have to go to the very back of your brain, this is where your heartbeat and your breathing lie. That's why someone with FASD, they can breathe fine. They have a heartbeat, that's fine. Their circadian rhythms are fine because those neurons weren't so dependent on that glial cell structure to get to where they needed to go. So they were able to set up shop, no problem. Now, because you've been exposed to alcohol prenatally and because you have some holes in that glial cell structure, the neurons that had to travel a little further into your brain for their functions, they got lost. So now that's why you're starting to see some challenges with fight or flight responses or sexual behaviors or inappropriate sexual behaviors. That lies in the center of that brain. So now when we have to go to the furthest point of our brain from our origin, so now these neurons were so dependent on this glial cell structure to get to where they needed to go, they didn't actually get there. And that's why you start to see problems with the higher cortical functions. Inability to make sound decisions, inability to maintain friendships, inability to have problem-solving behaviors, analytical behaviors, handling money, making sound decisions, all lie in the front part of our brain, and they just don't have the infrastructure in order to support these functions. So really, when you see someone with FASD making poor decisions, it's not because they're doing it willfully, it's because they actually don't have the infrastructure in their brain to teach them or tell them otherwise. If none of that made sense, just look at this image. On the left side, if you have not been exposed to alcohol prenatally, your brain is this beautifully intricate, fast-functioning organ, and it will function in seconds. But if you have been exposed to alcohol prenatally, your brain infrastructure is in disarray, and that means that you have slow processing. It means you're unable to answer questions as fast as your peers would be able to. So let's zero in on these brain cells a little bit more. The top portion is an unaffected neuron. So an unaffected neuron, and the bottom portion is an affected neuron that has been exposed to alcohol prenatally. Both neurons have the same three parts, dendrite, cell body, and axon. So the way that information flows is that neurochemical transmitters will bind to those dendrites, send in information down those very many branches of the dendrites into the cell body, down this axon. And then once it reaches the end of that axon, it will have a burst of neurotransmitters to the next neuron. Now, when you look at the neuron that's been exposed to alcohol prenatally, although we still have the same three parts, dendrite, cell body, and axon, it looks very different. So that means that even though we'll have some chemical messengers and they will bind to our dendrites, we don't have as many dendrites, which means there's not a lot of places for these neurotransmitters to bind. So if there's not a lot of places for it to bind, it's going to be a very weak signal. Now, this very weak signal is going to be drawn into the cell body and taken down this axon, but look, the axon is about 2 to 3 times the length of a normal axon, which means information of a very weak signal has to flow down 2 to 3 times the length. And what do you think is going to happen if it has a longer way to flow? Information is literally going to get lost in their brain. So at some point, that very weak signal isn't going to make it to the end of that axon in order to have another burst. So that's when you're talking to someone with FASD and they stare at you with a blank stare and you're thinking, well, what just happened here? It's because information just got lost in their brain and they don't know what you're asking them. The other way to think about it is if you were sitting in your family room, you get up, you go to the kitchen, and then you forgot why you're there and you literally just go back to the family room. Think about your mental state at that moment. You're probably stressed, you're tired, you're anxious, and you're not in the right mental state in order to do that. To remember why you went into the kitchen. So this is, and information got lost in your brain, and you're not processing or working at your ultimate. This is what kids or individuals with FASD deal with on a daily basis. Now we're going to go through the physical facial features. When you look at this image in the slide, if you Google FASD facial features, this is one of the first images that will pop up. Typically, people with FASD will be born with a small birth weight, a small head circumference. They'll have small eye openings. They'll have a smooth, wide philentrum, so that's that portion between your nose and your upper lip where it's bowed for us. It's smooth and wide. And then they may have a thin upper lip. So when you look at this, you're going to say, hey, it's pretty distinctive features. Why can't we diagnose this faster? Why can't we just look at a population of people and pick them out? The thing is that only 10% or less of the population that has FASD will present like this. So 90% will not have any physical facial features, or they'll have maybe one of very slight physical facial feature. So you're dealing with an invisible disability. So cognitive deficits. There are three super buckets that we can think of when it comes to cognitive deficits. There's self-regulation, neurocognitive functioning, and adaptive functioning. And everybody, no matter who you are, has these three buckets. Now, whereas a neurotypical brain is probably functioning at 100% in all three buckets, an FASD brain will have deficits in each one, if not all. So let's talk about self-regulation. Self-regulation is your ability to control your moods, your behavior, your impulsiveness, your attention, your sensory input and output. So for example, right now, if you can't hear it in my voice, I'm a little sick right now. But I have had the ability to get up, get dressed, I'm here, I'm functioning, I'm able to control my mood, I'm able to control my attention right now in order to deliver this training to you. I am exhibiting self-regulation at its best. Now, you probably use self-regulation all the time in every single one of your fields because you're dealing with the public all the time and you're also dealing with your coworkers. And you are definitely not 100% every single day of the year. So you are using self-regulation. The thing with someone with FASD is they don't have a lot of self-regulation, so they're deficient in this bucket, which means that if they're having a bad day, you're going to see it. If they have impulsiveness in them, they're not going to be able to control that impulsive behavior. They don't have impulse control built in. They don't have self-regulation. When you look at neurocognitive functioning, this is the ability to have full control over executive functioning tasks like memory or learning. So if you teach someone how to brush their teeth today, and they brush their teeth every day for the next 10 years, and they do it morning and evening perfectly fine, then one day they wake up and they are not able to do it. And instead of us thinking, okay, you know what, this is something to do with neurocognitive functioning, we're going to say, hey, you're being lazy, go brush your teeth. The thing is that with someone with FASD, they may show mastery of a task one day, and the very next day, they will forget how to do it. So they could do something for years, and the very next day, they can't do it. And that's because neurocognitive functioning plays a part in that. Now, the last super bucket is adaptive functioning. And this is the skills needed to meet the demands of one's environment. So this is what you use on a regular basis. This is your social interaction skills. If you have a conversation with someone, and both are neurotypical, and you're standing fairly close to each other, the one person is going to take a step back. And that's because I was in your space. And I'm going to see that social cue, and I'm going to understand, okay, it's not something against me. I'm just in your space. I need to take a step back as well. Now, we're going to continue that conversation, and no feelings are going to be hurt. Now, let's say that we had that same conversation as though I had FASD and the other person on the other end is neurotypical. So the neurotypical person takes a step back. Now, because I have FASD, I'm not going to understand what that cue means. I'm going to take a step forward. And then you're going to think, what the heck? I just took a step back. You're going to take another step back. I'm going to take another step forward. Now, it's really cute when they're really little, when they're in kindergarten, but when they get to be of an older age, now that individual starts to become an aggressor. Because why are you coming into my personal space? I've given you the social cue. So they lack an adaptive functioning. And that's where you can start to see a lot of misinformation and a lot of miscommunication is happening with someone with FASD and people on the receiving end of that interaction. So now let's zero in on some behaviors. So there's this chart. I can send you a link later if you'd like. So the content of the chart is not really as applicable as the patterns of those X's. So the very first column, you'll see overlapping characteristics and mental health diagnosis behaviors. Across the top, you'll see FASD is the very first column, ADHD, sensory integration, autism, bipolar, RAD, so on and so forth. What you'll see is that there's an X in every single one of those rows under FASD. But for any other diagnosis, it's all sporadic. So what that means is that if you have FASD, you are going to exhibit the traits that are already belonging to other disorders or other disabilities that we readily recognize in our society. So let's take a look at this a little more. No impulse control or act hyperactive. FASD checkmark, ADHD, sensory integration, bipolar, RAD, also checkmark. Often interrupts or intrudes, FASD checkmark, ADHD, sensory integration, autism, bipolar, also checkmark. Problems with social interaction, FASD checkmark, autism, bipolar, also checkmark. So the reason I bring this to you is that if you have someone who's coming to you and they're exhibiting traits of an ADHD or they're exhibiting lots of traits of a bipolar person, but then they're coming in with this long laundry list of these diagnoses, maybe we're not dealing with every single one of these individually. Maybe you're dealing with FASD, which is truly the umbrella for every other diagnosis out there. And the other thing is that if we're living in a society that doesn't really recognize FASD as a primary diagnosis, and we only look at FASD after we've exhausted every single other diagnosis out there, it's going to be a problem because when you start to apply autism strategies to an FASD brain, it's actually detrimental to them. And the reason being, FASD is a developmental disability. If you are applying ABA or IBI therapy, which is behavior modification therapies, to an FASD brain, you are expecting the FASD behavior to be changed. And the thing is, it can't be changed because it's permanent brain injury. Those behaviors are a symptom of their disability. What you can change is the environment around them. And that's why ABA or IBI and behavior modification interventions do not work. So before we get into more behavior, looking at two concepts, there's IQ and executive functioning. So IQ is what you know. Executive functioning is knowing what to do with the information you have. So a great example of this is when we're writing our G1 to G2 to our G for our licensing in Ontario. IQ is what you know. So G1, the government is testing our knowledge of our driving manual. Can you write down your knowledge of the signs, of the roadways, of the rules of how to turn left or right or center? Executive functioning is our G2. So that is us testing our G1 ability into actual action. So now we know you know the rules. We know you have the IQ for it. Let's see you apply it. So knowing what to do with the information you have. Now, being able to tie IQ and executive functioning comes very easily for a neurotypical brain. The reason being, you have a very intact corpus callosum. Someone with FASD doesn't have an intact corpus callosum. So sometimes they're going to have a very high IQ, and then they still make these unsound, unlogical decisions and actions, and you're thinking, I know you're smarter than this. I know you know more than this. The thing is they don't. And the reason they don't is because they can't tie their IQ into executive functioning because their corpus callosum is damaged. IQ and executive functioning lie on two different sides of the brain. So knowing what you do with the information you have doesn't really necessarily mean that you have all the information. So what that means is you could have someone who has a very high IQ. So they rate over 70. So on paper, they look like they're functioning fine. The problem is they can't be left alone at home even though that they're 12 or 15 because they don't have the executive functioning to know if I turn on the stove, I must turn it off. Otherwise, I'm going to set the house on fire. They won't know how to apply any of the information that they do have. So here's your new mantra. Think brain, not behavior. Again, you cannot change the behavior of an FASD kiddo or an FASD individual. It's permanent brain injury. It forevermore will be this way. What you can change is the environment around that person and giving them more support, more check-ins, more people that they can actually keep them on track and make sure that they have a system and support around them. A nice thing that the government right now always throws out there is a wraparound model, a wraparound care. Well, here's the individual. This population needs a wraparound more than anybody else. They want to truly succeed. The problem is we have no infrastructure built into any one of our services that allows them to succeed. Behavior. So I've pulled out a couple behaviors that we'll talk about. One of them is no concept of ownership. And this is a really nice way of me saying that they steal. The thing is that they really don't understand the concept. So something that comes innately to us in kindergarten, where it's my stuff, don't touch my stuff, doesn't necessarily come very naturally to someone with FASD. So just like any other skill, you have to teach them ownership. It has to be understood over time. With my younger kiddos, a strategy we use is stickers. Anything with a red sticker on it, you can touch. And it's the same red sticker. So we get packages upon packages of red stickers. And anything that has a red sticker on it, they can touch. Anything that doesn't, go find someone and ask if you can touch it. That way, they're not going to get into any trouble that, yeah, red sticker, mine I can touch. No one's going to yell at me for touching my own bag. No red sticker, I can't touch this bag. Someone will yell at me if I touch this bag. So we're teaching them how to look for a visual. With my older kiddos, we actually just sew in a very discreet thing into the shoulder or into the arm bag of the backpack, and it's just like a green thread or something that they could just quickly look, oh yeah, that's mine, I can touch. I put a star beside concrete language, and we'll go back to that in a second. Impulsivity. So over time in evolution, we as humans have built in impulse control, but our innate response is to go for the benefit. So let's say that we're walking by a piece of chocolate cake and you're on a diet. You see the cake, your immediate thing is, ooh, I want cake. Then you have some impulse control to say, no, we just worked out this morning, we're counting our calories, we're trying to lose our weight. If I eat this cake, I now have to go back to the gym, I'm going to feel like crap afterwards. So we have impulse control, thinking about our consequences to our actions, and we stop ourselves. But even if it's a split second, our innate response is to go for the impulsivity. The thing with FASD kiddos is that they don't have impulse control built in. And you'll see that from a young age into adulthood. They will not be able to control their impulse. They will act first and process the information later sometimes. And by the time they actually realize what they've done, it's way too late because the consequences have already been put into place. So I have a lot of people coming from a lot of walks of life that always ask me, what do we do? We always ask them why. Why do you do this? Why do you think this way? Why can't you act your own age? Stop asking why. The thing is they don't know why. They're only using one side of their brain sometimes. So they're only using their emotional side. They're not using their logical side. When you're asking me why, you're asking me to access my emotion and my logic and form a response to you, and I don't have the capability or the infrastructure in my brain to be able to do that. Planning, connecting cause and effect, and taking responsibility. So this is a general framework that we all work from in every single walk of life. Action A leads to result B, leads to consequence C, leads to generalization D. So what do I mean by that? It means that if I perform an action, so I steal something from a store, the result is I'm going to get caught and I'm going to feel bad and everyone's going to get mad at me and I'm going to have to put this thing away and I'm probably going to get arrested. The consequence is that I'm going to go to trial and I'm probably going to get community service or some jail time. And the generalization of all of this is don't do it again, right? I give you a sentence, don't do it again. Don't steal again. You know better. The thing is with someone with FASD, there's a break somewhere there. They may be able to tie their action into the result, but they can't tie that consequence in. They may be able to do A, B, and C, but they can't do that to a generalization as don't do it again. So what does that mean for later in life? It means escalating sentences for non-escalating offenses. So there was a judge who had an individual that came before him with a DUI the first time. And the judge knew a little bit about FASD, and he goes, why did you do it? Like, tell me what happened. He goes, oh, I had a couple of beers and I drove my car. So the judge goes, okay, I'm going to let you off. I'm going to give you some community service. I want you to make me a deal. I don't want to see you standing in front of me again. I don't want you to drink and drive your car. And he says, okay. So he goes away. A couple months later, comes back in front of the same judge. Same offense. So same offense, non-escalating offense, a DUI. And the judge goes, what happened? We had a deal. I don't want to see you in front of me. I told you not to drink and drive your car. He goes, I didn't drive my car. I drank and drove Bill's car. So he drove somebody else's car. And the thing is that use of concrete language would have helped him in this situation. Now, the same individual came back again, and the judge had said, don't drink and drive any car. He came back again, third DUI. Again, his sentence gets escalated, so now he's in prison for a little bit. And the judge says, what happened this time? He just needed to know what generalization happened. And the individual said, I didn't drink and drive a car. I drove a truck. So again, use of concrete language goes a long way. There's social interaction and vulnerability. So individuals with FASD are very vulnerable to false confessions. And that's because they have poor communication skills. They're very easily confused under pressure. They have impulsive behavior, so they don't have impulse control. So if you ask them a question, sometimes a lot of the clients I work with, their initial response is yes. just to make you stop talking and to please you. My other kiddos who are a little more deviant, they like to say no immediately, no matter what it is, even if it's something they like to do. So the impulsive behavior is there. But they're so eager to please, and they have lots of memory issues as well. So when you start to ask them questions and they're leading questions, you can lead them into a false confession because, one, they don't understand what's happening. Two, they really just want you to be quiet and slow down. So they're going to say whatever they can to make you shush. So there's an example that I'm using of one of my actual clients. He was 21 at the time, and he was asked by a friend, and you can't see me, but it's quotations, air quotations, to meet him at the back of a store to help him load up a truck. So my kiddo says, oh, okay, sure. Like, if my friend's asking me to do something, I'll meet you. And then he didn't think about the time. So the guy's asking him to meet him at 11 o'clock at night at the back of the store in an alleyway with no lights on and nobody else around. So obviously they're stealing merchandise, but this doesn't occur to my client. He just knows his friend asked him to do something, and there he is doing it. So he had no idea that he was stealing. So obviously when they got caught, his friend ran away, and my client got stuck with the law enforcement officers who really just didn't understand what was happening because my client was sitting there with a blank stare this entire time, not understanding that he just engaged in a criminal activity, not knowing it. Confabulation. So there is this image that that's on the screen right now, and I'll give you a second to look at it. But what I want you to see is, what do you see in this image? Lots of people will say that they see 3 circles or little Pac-Mans, 2 stars, or 1 black triangle and an overlapping white triangle. So I'll give you a second to just take that image in. So if you see that white triangle, and usually when I ask this in real time, I call everybody a liar, because if you see the white triangle, you're actually lying to me and to yourself. That white triangle doesn't actually exist. What exists in this picture is that the 3 black circles and the black triangle with cutouts in it. In order for your brain to make sense of the image you're seeing, you're putting that white triangle in there. And even though I'm telling you it's not there and you're going to try to pull that white triangle out and not see it anymore, you can't unsee it because it's something your brain truly believes to be real. So confabulation is not lying. It's an unconscious act, and it's not a deliberate process, and it's not made in a malicious act either. So the individual who's confabulating really truly does believe the story is real. So it's kind of like you're dealing with someone with dementia or Alzheimer's. When they pull in a memory from the past and they think it's happening in real time, we don't actually engage. We know that if we engage, it may erupt in some violence or aggression. We just accept it and we move on. And that's exactly, unfortunately, what you have to do with the FASD disability and when it comes to confabulation. Accept, move on. Just maturity. So there is a difference between chronological versus developmental age in FASD. Chronologically, you'll have someone who's 18 years old. Developmentally, they have a whole spectrum of their skills. So the rule of thumb is take the chronological age and divide by 2. That is the age of the individual you're actually dealing with. So when we say 18 years old as an adult, well, if you have an individual with FASD, you actually have, even though it's an 18-year-old on paper, you actually have a 9-year-old. So you're asking a 9-year-old to make life-defining decisions. You're asking, if you have a 10-year-old who's just gotten in trouble with the law, you're asking a 5-year-old, why did you do something? And if you understand that discrepancy and you lower your expectations of this individual, they'll rise to meet it because they'll rise to their developmental age. But if you keep them at their chronological age, they will constantly disappoint you and themselves. So there's auditory processing as well. Auditory processing says, it's the way that we process information that is different with someone with FASD. So this is a police warning from New Brunswick. So I'll read it out to you. I wish to give you the following warning. You need not say anything. You have nothing to hope from any promise or favor and nothing to fear from any threat, whether or not you say anything. Anything you do say may be used as evidence. Do you understand? Now, when they put this up for about 20 individuals with FASD, 100% of them actually said this. I give you the following. Say anything. You have no hope, promise, fear a threat, you say anything, you may be used. You understand. Now, 100% of 20 individuals that had FASD heard the red words. This is a very different meaning than what it originally meant to be. And when you think of our justice system and our teaching systems and our society as a fabric, we talk verbally all the time. That's how we communicate. Verbal communication is the worst way to communicate with someone with FASD. They need more, and they're not able to understand all the verbiage that's coming out at them, because if you're talking the way I'm talking right now, or even a little slower, this is the worst way to talk to someone with FASD. Now, when you think of our justice system, the judge will ask, what were you thinking? What we should be asking is, what was going on in that brain? The Criminal Code of Canada assumes that we have full brain function and we have full use of our cognitive processes, such as memory and reasoning. We don't have that when it comes to FASD. So here's what we do need in our society. We do not need more prisons. We do not need more judges. We do need more probation officers. We do need more sentences that find the strengths of an individual to give them purpose. We do need more simplified probation instructions, because if they've gotten to the point that they are in the justice system, they're not understanding their society. And we're not doing them any good by continuously saying that they can be rehabilitated, because they can't. Remember, it's a permanent brain injury. The Criminal Code of Canada, Section 718D, states that to assist in rehabilitating offenders. Again, we can't rehabilitate a brain disorder. We want prisoners to reflect and understand the consequences when we put them in jail. The problem is there's a problem in the way they understand information. So reflecting on consequences and tying that all together in generalization, that won't work either. We actually put people in jail for public safety purposes. The thing is, if we gave these individuals a true wraparound care, we gave them people to check in with, we gave them a framework in which to work from, we taught them skills that we just assume that they know, they would no longer be someone that we need to fear in our public. They wouldn't be someone who we need to shield because of safety purposes. So I'm a 10-second kid in a 1-second world. Just remember how fast information flows in our society. And we expect answers to happen all the time and very, very fast. Just when you're asking someone with FASD a question, take a second and allow them to answer. And when I say take a second, I actually mean count to 10 or 15 in your head before you ask a question again. Because if you ask a question and then by second 5, you re-ask the question again because you assume they didn't hear you or they're not answering you, you're setting them back to 0 to reprocess a totally new question again. Give them time. So what do we do? First, you have to understand, in every person, in every community agency, and every parent that I've ever trained and talked to, you cannot discipline out a disability. It's like telling someone who is visually impaired, go home, and when you come back tomorrow, you better be able to see. Telling someone with FASD, go home, and when you come back tomorrow, then you better be able to act a certain way. They can't do it. Understanding there's a paradigm that we use here. Math, driving, cooking, any kind of skills, life skills, academic skills. We teach, we practice, we reinforce, we repeat. I remember the first time I made a meal, and I did not cook the spinach properly, and it was terrible. But nobody got mad at me. They taught me, they practiced, I repeated, and now I'm a great cook, so I think. But for behavior, we punish, and we repeat. Imagine if you applied the exact same paradigm. Teach, practice, reinforce, and repeat, understanding that there's an actual developmental disability that's underlining the behavior. The behavior is not willful. Change your paradigm from the fact that they won't do something to maybe they can't do something, or that they're stealing, to understanding that they weren't given the skills to understand what ownership or boundaries are, or that they can't sit still, to understanding that they're overstimulated or they're overwhelmed. And part of the strategies that you're going to want to use is concrete language. When you see this test right here, it says circle the smallest number, and 1, 2, and 3 are circled, and they're all wrong. The thing is, it's not actually wrong. They're taking you at your literal meaning. So whatever you're saying, say what you mean and mean what you say. Don't say, I'll be back in a sec, when you're actually going to be back in 10 minutes. Don't say, oh, it's raining cats and dogs outside, because they're going to go look for the cat and dog. So we've already gone through this example, don't drink and drive your car. Now here, what is the risk of us not serving this population? In the past year, 2.4% of the general population will have a serious attempt at suicide. 13% of the FASD population will have at least one attempt of suicide risk. Males with FASD are a higher risk. And if we do not serve this population early, if we do not give them the wraparound care they truly need, you're going to run into adults that are now going to have mental health problems, 94%. 43% will have a disrupted school experience. 42% will have trouble with the law, and 60% will have trouble with confinement. Of that, 40% are incarcerated. The rate of the FASD population in Canada over the general population is 28 times higher. Youth with FASD are 19 times more likely to be confined to a young offenders facility than their non-affected peers. And this is costing us, just looking at the inmate population, we're looking at $7 million annually for us criminalizing a brain disability. And we're expecting them to be rehabilitated, and they can't. 12.8 is the average age of children with FASD that start to have trouble with the law. And I'll leave you with this one quote. And this quote was given to me by an individual who was 13 at the time, and he's high functioning, so high IQ. He had minimal amount of prenatal alcohol exposure. And so he was a really well-adjusted kid, but sometimes he just didn't understand his environment. And he said this thing from this book really made him feel like somebody understood what was happening, because he felt like this on a daily basis. And what he said is, I lied and I said I was busy. I was busy, but not in the way most people understand. I was busy taking deeper breaths. I was busy silencing irrational thoughts. I was busy calming a racing heart. I was busy telling myself I am okay. Sometimes this is my busy and I will not apologize for it. And for a brief time, I took this quote out of my trainings because it was very emotional for me to talk about. But since that time, this 13-year-old was one of those males of the 13% who committed suicide. He's no longer with us. Now, he was high functioning and had high IQ, and he didn't understand his social environment. So if you can understand an individual like that, who's very social, who understood his environment most days and understood social interactions, could feel like this, imagine everybody else that has this, who's dealing with absolutely no support, those parents who have absolutely no respite. There is only one worker per region for FASD, and that's me for the Peel region. That's it. But autism, other disabilities, they are recognized as exceptionalities in schools. They're given wraparound care. They're given services. My kids don't even qualify for social programming at some agencies because it's not considered a mental health disorder. Something needs to change when it comes to this population, and I'm hoping as FASD workers across each region start to roll out these types of trainings, we start to increase and get awareness and a voice out there for the population that truly cannot speak for themselves. So at the very end, there is my contact information and my email address. If anyone has any questions, I'm always here to help, regardless if you're in the Peel region or not.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was a fantastic presentation. If people have questions, please, in the few minutes that we have remaining, type them into the chat box. I do want to say that people were very interested in the very detailed chart that you had on one of the slides, the behavior chart that you had. So if there's a way to send that out specifically along with the presentation itself, I'm not sure if it has a larger format to it. That would be fantastic. We did have a question about the urban Aboriginal population. If there's the question was from, I think, Denise, and it just said factors, and I'm not sure what she meant by factors, but if there was factors to consider for the urban Indigenous population regarding FASD.
So Okay, so it's actually a common myth that FASD is more prevalent in the First Nations population than it is in the general population. The fact is that that research has been so biased because the Aboriginal population has been so readily accessible for us in order to conduct research. So we're exploiting a population that most likely this is not just an Aboriginal problem. If you wait another 2 more years, we're going to have a huge study that's going to be released that actually talks about the general population, which includes, in such a multinational backgrounds like Toronto and Peel region and Brampton specifically, you'll have a lot more information about what factors goes into a mother having a child with FASD. Now, just generally speaking, what I will say is that the factors are the medical community is not so engaged and does not understand that no alcohol during the pregnancy is safe. So there are still doctors out there, my own doctor in particular as well, actually advocated that I have a drink during my 3rd trimester. So this is something that has to happen at our medical stage, not only just there, but it has to happen across, you know, our policings, our teaching institutions. Everyone needs to kind of get on board and understand what FASD is.
Okay, thank you. Then we have a question that probably can't be answered that quickly, but regarding a client who is repeatedly arrested for violent behavior, they do have support, 24-hour support from a community agency, but wondering what, you know, I guess what to do, best way to support that person.
Okay. The first thing I would say is look at the consistency within this person's life. Has there been a lot of changes within their immediate setting where they're living? Whatever worker is involved with them. If it's a constant revolving door, right there is your answers. You need to have the same constant personnel. It's going to be very hard for them to build any relationships up because relationships are super abstract, and abstract is not where an FASD kiddo lies. They lie in the concrete. So if you show up and you're there, not necessarily saying anything, but you're showing that you're there and you're constant, they will eventually start to form a relationship with you. Now, the other one is that look at their structure and routine. Do they have a purpose of their day? Are they just getting up and being left to their own accord? Do they have do they know exactly what to do the moment that their feet hit the floor? If they don't, then start thinking about checklists, start thinking about visuals. And just remember, the worst way to communicate with someone with FASD is by verbally talking to them all the time. So visuals go a long way, and we have different checklists that we put into the washroom to walk them through the process of brushing their teeth and then going back to the room and then going to the room and how do you pick out their clothes for the day, things like that. With the violent behavior, I know the go-to is saying they're violent and we need to lock them up and they need to be arrested. The thing is, their violence is just a symptom of their disability. So if they do have violent tendencies, think about a way that they can get it out. Would a punching bag work? Would they be, a lot of my kids, a lot of my clients, especially in the older ages, do really well with karate, believe it or not, because it's so structured and those instructors are so focused that these kids learn structure and routine and they actually look forward and it's an outlet for them to hit something so that they don't do it in other areas. And the last thing I would suggest is teaching them a way to channel their anger and aggression. This is something that should have been taught earlier on in life, but most likely it wasn't because FASD is not in the forefront of people's brains. So if you're trying to teach them a skill, if you recognize that you're getting angry, if you recognize you're shaking hands or your redness in your face, this is what you do. And give them one option. 2 options is too many. Tell them what to do and teach them and do it with them sometimes. Role play it when they're actually in a great headspace because that's a great spot to start teaching them new skills. Don't teach it to them while they're already escalated.
Okay, great. Then the next question had to do with substance use and FASD clients who, any strategies for dealing with clients who are using substances.
What's the question?
There was a question about clients with FASD who are using substance use.
Okay.
What would you recommend? Any strategies that would be especially...
So you're already like a mothers who are addicted?
No. No. Clients with FASD.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. People with FASD who are using substances currently, the best thing that you can do is, one, remember that cognitive-based talk therapy isn't going to work with them. They need more practical strategies on what to do with their addiction issues or their substance use things. Most likely, they need a replacement skill. So you need to find out where their passions lie and try to get them to utilize that in replacing the drug or substance use. The fact is that someone with FASD is more likely to have a substance use later on in life if they don't have interventions earlier on in life. So some of those interventions that we start to try to teach people earlier on in life is, how do you channel when you're not feeling so well? How do you channel that energy when you're angry? What do you do when somebody is yelling at you? So if we teach those skills at a young age, then you don't run into these kinds of addiction issues later on in life. But if they are not taught that, then you're going to have to take a step back and really try to teach them what they can do with that. So it's really just looking at a replacement skill for them. But this is a whole different type of conversation, and I'd be happy to talk to this person outside of this webinar.
Okay, yes. Your contact information is there, and it's included with the presentation slide that will be sent out. So people are welcome to follow up with you afterwards. There's also a question about neuroplasticity and FASD. I guess it's with regards to, can the brain, I suppose, rewire over time?
Yeah, so the way that I framed it, I know that it looks so detrimental that someone with FASD doesn't have the ability to change or learn. They absolutely do. So they do have neuroplasticity in their brain. They have the ability to rewire whatever infrastructure they already have. The thing is that where we have stem cells, they have reduced amount of stem cells. Where we can learn something after 2 or 3 tries, they probably need about 30 tries. And when you think about any kind of systems that anybody's in, we don't give them 30 tries to actually show their abilities. We cut them off at about 5, and we're like, yeah, you're not getting it. So they absolutely do have the ability to learn. They do have the ability to evolve. We just need a heck of a lot more patience and a lot more support when it comes to these individuals.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Then from Denise, asking if your suggestions in the PowerPoint, I guess, are a Western-based model?
So Western-based model is it's a triple-fold answer, I guess. Currently, there is no recommendation or internationally adopted guideline to diagnosing FASD, let alone the approach to it. But what I will say is that Canada is in the lead for this, and particularly BC is in the lead for the development of the Canadian diagnostic system, as well as the approach of looking at a neurobehavioral approach. So absolutely it is a Canadian approach. It is not recognized in the States at all. It's somewhat being recognized within international circles, such as India, Germany, Switzerland. So a lot of these individuals do come together. Actually, there's a huge conference that's happening in the end of April, where all these amazing minds come together and they start to talk about the internationally accepted approach. So short answer, yes, it is a Canadian model. And you will see every single FASD worker within Ontario will have adopted the exact same model that I've kind of laid out for you here.
And then what I think is a interesting question from Linda is, how does someone get diagnosed or assessed for FASD later in life if they weren't diagnosed in their early years?
Well, unfortunately, the only answer I have is later on in years, you got to go to BC or Alberta, who actually has diagnostic systems set up for individuals with FASD. We have nothing in Ontario. St. Mike's used to have a clinic. It has since been shut down, and I assume it's shut down because of lack of funding. Speaking just in the Peel region, we have one diagnostic team who is absolutely amazing, but they only have the capacity to take 10 assessments per year, and they only look at a specific age range from 0 to 6 years of age. So when you're looking at a 7-year-old that's aged out of my diagnostic system in my own region, we don't have anything else. And it's because the medical community is not so engaged, especially in Ontario, and it's a real shame. We need more doctors talking about this. We need more people asking about prenatal alcohol exposure in their intake forms, moreover than drug and narcotic use, which they always ask about. It's very hard to come up with a diagnosis in Ontario.
That's really unfortunate. That's
yeah.
A very unfortunate answer, but I want to thank everyone. I want to thank our presenter. I want to thank everyone, the vast majority who stayed beyond the end of the presentation, but I want to thank everyone. Obviously, this is a great topic, something that people found very interesting, and I thought the presentation was absolutely fascinating and packed with information. Again, you will be getting the presentation and link to the presentation video afterwards, and a brief follow-up survey will be sent to you as well. Please complete it. And but we do have someone who does suggest going to Developmental Services Ontario, and so Surrey Place does do FASD assessments.
So I'll just say about the DSO, a lot of my clients will apply for DSO, but because they have high IQ, they do not actually qualify for DSO funding. I have one client that's actually going through that as we speak in real time, and they've been denied. So I don't know much about what Surrey Place does. I do know that they do work with the FASD population. They do have an amazing FASD worker there as well. But the problem with a lot of the government-funded applications is that these guys don't qualify, because on paper they look fine.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it and look forward to seeing a lot of you at our next webinar. Thank you very much, everyone.